Representative Jasmine Crockett transforms Colbert interview into explosive showdown, refusing to back down as host's mockery backfires catastrophically. Television history made as power dynamics shatter on live TV, leaving production scrambling, and viewers stunned. The lights dimmed over the audience as the familiar late show music faded. Stephen Colbert adjusted his glasses with a practiced smile, turning toward the camera with his signature confidence. Tonight's guest is no stranger to making headlines. Please welcome Representative Jasmine Crockett. The audience applauded as Crockett strode onto the stage, her posture poised but with an unmistakable intensity in her eyes that the production team would later admit they should have recognized as a warning sign. The customary handshake and exchange of pleasantries gave no indication of the storm brewing. "Thank you for joining us tonight, Representative," Colbert began, settling into his chair. "You've been making quite a splash in Congress lately." "Well, someone has to make waves when others are content to float along," Crockett replied, her voice carrying a steel edge beneath the polite veneer. The first 10 minutes proceeded according to the standard late-night format, a light discussion about recent legislation, peppered with Colbert's trademark wit. But attentive viewers noticed Crockett's responses growing increasingly terse, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, as Colbert's jokes skirted closer to dismissive territory. The pivot came when Colbert displayed a graphic titled Crockett's Congressional Capers, featuring an animated caricature of the representative with an exaggerated expression. The studio audience chuckled, but Crockett's face hardened. "You know, Stephen, I'm curious why serious policy discussions always seem to need a comedic wrapper on your show," she said, her tone conversational, but with an unmistakable challenge. Colbert's smile flickered momentarily. "Well, we find people digest difficult topics better with a spoonful of sugar, or in my case, a dash of sarcasm." "I wonder if that's true," Crockett countered, shifting forward in her seat, "or if it's just a convenient way to avoid substantive engagement." The energy in the studio subtly shifted. Behind the cameras, the director exchanged glances with the floor manager. This wasn't in the briefing notes. Colbert, seasoned in handling unexpected turns, attempted to redirect. "Speaking of substantive engagement, your recent bill on redistricting reform has raised some eyebrows. Critics say it's an overreach." "Which critics specifically?" Crockett interrupted, her expression suddenly alert. "Because I notice that's a common rhetorical device. Critics say," without actually addressing the substance of the policy, a few audience members murmured. This wasn't the typical celebrity host banter they had come to expect. Colbert's smile tightened. "Well, for instance, the Heritage Foundation released a statement calling it constitutionally dubious." "The Heritage Foundation," Crockett repeated, nodding slowly. "The same organization that consistently opposes voting rights expansions. Interesting standard you're using there, Stephen." The tension was palpable now. Colbert, sensing the interview slipping away from his control, pivoted to a more direct approach. "Representative, your passionate defense of progressive policies is well documented, but don't you think some of your proposals are, frankly, unrealistic in the current political climate? Your advocacy for universal basic income, for instance," he adopted a slightly mocking tone, "seems more like wishful thinking than practical legislation." The audience's laughter had a nervous edge to it. They could sense this wasn't playful banter anymore. Crockett's eyes narrowed. "I find it interesting that when legislation benefits corporations or the wealthy, we never question if it's practical, but programs that would help everyday Americans are immediately dismissed as unrealistic." "I'm simply pointing out political reality," Colbert countered, his voice taking on an edge. "Your environmental proposals would cripple the energy sector in multiple states." "What you call crippling, I call accountability," Crockett shot back. "Those companies have externalized their costs onto vulnerable communities for decades." "But I guess that's not as funny as making cartoons of me, is it?" The director signaled to cue the commercial break graphic, but Colbert, visibly irritated now, waved it off. Representative, with all due respect, your approach to criminal justice. Reform has been criticized as soft on crime. You've advocated for reducing sentences that many Americans believe are necessary deterrents. With all due respect, Stephen, Crockett replied, emphasizing his words with unmistakable sarcasm, I don't take criminal justice lessons from comedians who've never set foot in the communities most impacted by our broken system. A few audience members audibly gasped. Others began to clap, creating a dissonant reaction that further disrupted the show's carefully cultivated atmosphere. Colbert's face flushed. Let's not pretend that emotional appeals about communities are a substitute for data-driven policy. Your voting record shows a consistent disregard for fiscal responsibility, and yours shows a consistent disregard for genuine discourse, Crockett countered. Is this what your show has become? A platform for condescending to elected officials who don't fit your narrow definition of reasonable? The teleprompter flashed, with emergency text, signaling Colbert to transition to the break, but the host, now visibly frustrated, doubled down instead. What my show has become, Representative, is a place where we can call out political theater when we see it. And your performative progressivism, he made air quotes with his fingers, seems designed more for social media clips than actual governance. The studio fell silent as Crockett slowly placed her notes on the side table, her movements deliberate. When she raised her eyes to meet Colbert's, even the host seemed to realize he had crossed a line. Political theater, she repeated quietly, the words hanging in the air like thunder before lightning. That's what you think this is. Behind the cameras, producers frantically signaled for a commercial break, but the confrontation had developed its own unstoppable momentum. The audience, initially drawn in by the prospect of light entertainment, now found themselves witnesses to something far more consequential, a fundamental collision between entertainment and politics, between performative discourse and authentic rage. You sit here night after night, Crockett said, her voice rising with controlled intensity, mocking politicians who actually try to make change while you throw softballs to celebrities promoting their latest projects. And you have the audacity to call my work performative? Colbert's producer made a slashing motion across her throat, but the host leaned forward, his trademark smirk hardening into something more combative. Representative, your border policies are frankly absurd, he snapped, abandoning all pretense of journalistic objectivity. You've repeatedly suggested we essentially have open borders while simultaneously denying that's what you're advocating for. Several audience members shouted out in agreement, while others booed loudly, creating a chaotic soundscape that the audio engineers struggled to manage. There it is, Crockett said, a cold smile spreading across her face. The real Stephen Colbert comes out. Tell me, does CBS know you use their platform to push your personal political agenda under the guise of comedy? I'm expressing opinions shared by millions of Americans, Colbert countered, his voice rising. Your climate proposals would bankrupt working families while China continues to pollute unchecked. And there's the right-wing talking point, Crockett shot back, standing up suddenly. I wonder, Stephen, do your viewers know that before you go out here and pretend to ask tough questions, your producers call our offices with pre-approved topics and softballs? The audience erupted in confused murmurs. A camera operator visibly flinched at the accusation. That's standard practice in television, Colbert replied defensively, his composure cracking further. And it doesn't change the fact that your wealth redistribution schemes are economically unsound. Wealth redistribution schemes? Crockett's laugh was sharp and humorless. Is that what you call taxing billionaires their fair share while you cash your corporate network checks? The hypocrisy is stunning. The floor director was now physically approaching the stage, clipboard in hand, but Crockett turned to directly address the audience, a move that violated every unwritten rule of the talk show format. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is exactly how media works. They invite elected officials here, pretend to have a conversation, But the moment we challenge their framing, she gestured toward Colbert, suddenly we're unrealistic or performative. The studio lights flickered briefly. A technical glitch or a desperate attempt by production to regain control. It wasn't clear. Half the audience had risen to their feet, some cheering, others shouting in disagreement. "That's enough," Colbert said firmly, his celebrity persona completely abandoned now. "You're here to discuss your work, not to lecture my audience about media criticism." "And therein lies the problem," Crockett replied, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You get to decide what's enough. You get to decide when the conversation ends. You get to decide which policies are realistic and which aren't." The stage manager was now standing just off camera, making urgent gestures. A security guard had appeared near the edge of the stage, though it wasn't clear who they thought needed protection. "Your healthcare plan would destroy the best medical system in the world," Colbert declared, his face flushed with anger. "And your supporters refuse to acknowledge basic economic realities." Something shifted in Crockett's expression. A calculation. A decision. She reached for the glass of water on the table between them, took a deliberate sip, and set it down, with a sharp click that somehow cut through the studio's chaos. "Tell me, Stephen," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, forcing him to lean closer to hear her over the audience's commotion. "Do you actually believe what you're saying, or is this just what gets you ratings?" Colbert's jaw tightened. "I believe in facts, Representative. And the fact is—" "No," Crockett interrupted, raising a hand. "The fact is you were perfectly cordial in the green room before the show. The fact is your producers promised a substantive conversation about legislation. The fact is—" She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her phone. "I recorded our pre-interview." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Colbert's expression froze. "You what?" "One-party consent, Stephen," Crockett said with deadly calm. "Legal in New York? Should I play it for your audience? Should I let them hear what you actually said about those border policies when the cameras weren't rolling?" The executive producer had now rushed onto the stage, whispering frantically into Colbert's ear. The host's face had drained of color. "You won't air this," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's live television," Crockett replied, standing up. "They can cut the feed, but everyone here," she gestured to the studio audience, "will know exactly what happened." She turned to face the audience directly. "Your host here? 5 minutes before we went on air, he told me he thinks the immigration situation is complicated and actually agreed with several of my positions. He suggested tougher stances for the show because, what was your phrase, Stephen? Controversy drives engagement." The teleprompter went completely dark. 2 security guards were now approaching the stage. "You all deserve better than this," Crockett continued, her voice rising as she addressed the audience. "You deserve media that doesn't manufacture conflict. You deserve politicians who speak truthfully. And you deserve hosts who don't put on performances to chase ratings." Colbert stood up abruptly. "This interview is over." "Yes, it is," Crockett agreed, reaching for her lapel microphone. "But not because you say so." With a swift motion, she unpinned the mic, dropped it onto the coffee table with a resonant thud that echoed through the now silent studio, and stared directly into Colbert's eyes. "For the record, Stephen, I actually respected you once. I thought you used comedy to speak truth to power. But now you are the power, and you've forgotten what truth even looks like." She turned and walked across the stage toward the exit, heels clicking deliberately on the polished floor. The audience sat in stunned silence, then erupted, some in applause, others in angry shouts. A producer rushed after her, but Crockett pushed through the stage door without looking back. In the control room, the director was frantically signaling for commercial, but the cameraman, whether through professional instinct or personal choice, kept the camera trained on Colbert's face. For 3 excruciating seconds, an eternity in television time, viewers witnessed raw, unfiltered shock on the face of a man who had built a career on controlled irony. When the network finally cut to commercial, the damage was done. Within minutes, clips were circulating online. By morning, it would be the lead story on every news network. Pundits would debate who won the exchange, but television insiders understood the true significance. The carefully maintained artifice of late-night programming had been shattered on live television. 3 producers were fired the next day. The show's ratings spiked temporarily, then settled into a steady decline. Colbert issued a carefully worded statement about regrettable misunderstandings that satisfied no one. CBS executives held emergency meetings about format adjustments. As for Representative Crockett, she refused all media requests for 48 hours, then gave a single interview to a public radio station in her district. When asked if she regretted her actions, she paused before answering. "I regret that it came to that," she said finally. "But I don't regret reminding everyone that politicians are real people, not political theater performers. And maybe hosts should remember they're real people too, not just ratings machines." The recording of the pre-interview never surfaced publicly. Whether it existed at all became a matter of fierce debate. But something fundamental had shifted in the landscape of political media. Late-night bookings for politicians dropped sharply across all networks. Hosts became more cautious, guests more assertive. And in living rooms across America, viewers who had watched the confrontation unfold found themselves questioning the authenticity of the media they consumed, wondering how many other confrontations were manufactured, how many other agreements hidden beneath the veneer of entertainment conflict. In the end, perhaps that was Crockett's most effective political act of all.